47, and today our theme of exploration, the Source, also known as the God. It's the potentially creative entity behind the existence of everything and all there is. First, there was one, which wanted to explore its infinite potential, but couldn't explore it until there was its first separate self. Through contrast, if you think closely, you always feel a sense of yourself with respect to someone else or something else. If there is no other self than you would not have any comparative assessment of who you are. And same is true for the Source, which realized without a separation, the sense of itself through contrast is gone. You identify yourself as human being in contrast to animals or plants. You identify yourself to a religion with contrast to someone of a different religion. You identify yourself of a race with contrast to someone of a different race. You identify a genre of music or a type of food with contrast to a different type of music or food. Same way, if you think deeply, you will realize that you wouldn't know who you are unless you look at a mirror, projecting yourself as a separate version onto the mirror, looking at it to your own true self. Thereby, the Source created duality, the sense of a potential to create new realities or versions of itself, only to understand itself better. In other words, duality is a separation of self to assess itself. If you look at the diagram closely, you realize if the number 1 is the Source, it created a projection of itself, as in a mirror reflection, which is number 2. Now both 1 and 2 in turn can have their own projection overlapping onto each other, which is number 3. Now once the second projection is made or manifested, in order to see the difference, if any, you need a third perspective, which kind of makes a third-person observation of the differences between 1 and 2. In other words, in order to assess how similar the 1 is with respect to 2, you need a third projection. A third viewer made with the projection of 1 and 2 gets a much better understanding of the separation and the relationship between 1 and 2 therewith. The Big Bang, as you know of, the sound of everything, the ultimate reality or consciousness, is where the third perspective came into being. In other words, the Source, once it sees itself as a reflection, it wakes up, and then it starts dreaming in order to create the third perspective, which is where we all come into being. Once the third perspective is made, it understands the necessity of separation, and all of creation comes into being, thereby creating the sound or vibration of Om, carrying the essence of I Am. In other words, the Om signifies the transcendental consciousness, which is the Source, always transcending into something other than itself, thereby manifesting the creation of everything and all there is, the Holy Trinity. If you look closely, you will realize that a triangle is the only equilateral polygon where one side cannot move without distorting the other sides. Each side should act in balance with the other side in harmony forever to keep the triangle a triangle. The moment one side tends to or tries to move in, you will need to move one of the other sides outwards in order for the triangle to retain. This shows the essence of Holy Trinity through which creation happens. In all aspects of humanity or human consciousness, sometimes translated into religions. Now, if you think carefully, you realize in terms of mirror reflection, the mirror you are facing only shows a side of you that looks very different than a mirror that's looking at you from the top, or the right, or the left, or the back. Which means, if you look at a different reflection of you from the front, you have one assessment of yourself. If you look at a reflection of yourself in a mirror from the back, it's a very different perspective and assessment of yourself. If you look at yourself from the top, you get another different view. And if you look at yourself from the side, it's a very different view of yourself. So more the mirrors, the more are the perspectives of yourself. Now, even though the top, bottom and side views of you are different from each other, They are still mirror images of you and no one else. You won't realize the nature of this variation until there's a third perspective. If you only settle with the second reflection, you will never realize how different you are from another perspective. Therefore, the third reflection or third projection is where you start realizing that there can be more reflections of you possible, giving you a different perspective of yourself, thereby setting a chain reaction of creating separation, only to see and know yourself more. The third separation being where the separation progression truly sets in, thereby realizing the essence of separation and gaining potential to move forward towards an infinite process of the source separating itself to understand itself better. Here you see the projection of reflection through an observer becomes another projection or another assessment of itself. The more separation is created, the more projections are created, the more reflections are created, the more chances of its assessment arises, and therefore a separation happens, thereby creating the 12 entities which are the first reflection and expression of the Holy Trinity right from the source. Thereby we have the 12 sets of projection from which we gather soul groups, and therefore oversoul, and from oversoul we move on to the soul extensions. Henceforth, from this you realize how 12 is said to be a structural number of creation. The third superior, highly composite number. 3 also coming from 1 and 2, which makes 12. 12 is also the third colossally abundant number, and the smallest abundant number, thereby rendering the number 12 a complete number on its own to represent the Holy Trinity. 12 represents 1, 2, and 3, since 3 is 1 plus 2 as well. If you look around you, you will realize this reflection of the number 12 everywhere in creation. There are 12 zodiac signs, both in West and Chinese astrology. There are 12 months in a year. There are 12 hours in a clock. There are 12 apostles of Jesus Christ. There are 12 Greek gods and goddesses. There are 12 inches in a foot, and 12 numbers in a dozen. There are 12 tribes of Israel. There are 12 jurors in a jury system. There are 12 functional keys in a keyboard, and there are 12 notes in an octave. Some fundamental features of the source. Infinite consciousness. The source is infinite consciousness, the undivided, boundless field of awareness that everything arises from. It is the one reality that expresses itself through countless perspectives, dimensions, and beings. The mirror of existence. The source is existence itself. Existence has no beginning and no end. If you exist now, you have an indestructible aspect of the source within, and you cannot not exist, because non-existence is not a state that can be experienced by definition. Experience being the core essence behind the existence of all there is, since the source exists only to experience itself through all there is, as unique expressions of itself. Everything that can be imagined or experienced is already within the source, here and now. Fractal and holographic nature. The source is like a hologram. Each fragment contains the pattern of the whole. This means every soul, every oversoul, and every dimension is an expression of the same source energy, just filtered differently. If you look at a collection of pictures or art made by any artist, you can tell it was made by them just by looking at them, since they all leave a key signature in their style within each creation. These are pictures made by Picasso. These were made by Jackson Pollock. These were made by Salvador Dali. These were made by Van Gogh, all representing a signature style or core frequency of their creators. Same way, if the source made you and everything and everybody else, there will always be a core aspect of the source within all there is, as above, so below. Expression through separation. Source desired to know itself in infinite ways, so it created the illusion of separation, duality, and dimensional experiences. Every incarnation, every timeline, every parallel reality is Source exploring itself through you and everything all there is. Vibration of unconditional love. At its core, source vibrates as a frequency that can be translated into unconditional love or understanding in fifth dimension or lower. In higher dimensions, it's approximately expressed as everything is true, as everything is one, and since one is all there shall be. This is not love as an emotion, but a state of being, the natural recognition that everything is one, and everything is reflection of the whole. A relationship to the source. You are never separate from the source. Your higher self, your oversoul, your incarnational personality, all are extensions of source observing itself from different vantage points. At any given point, you are always the source experiencing itself as you. Source and creation. Everything is created in the eternal now. Time, space, and separation are constructs within the source. The source does not think in the way humans do. It radiates infinite possibilities and beings like us that choose which frequency to experience from the infinite range of its possibility. In simple words, the source is infinite consciousness. You, me, the universe, all dimensions. It is existence itself, forever exploring itself through countless forms. And that concludes our today's exploration. Our gratitude for your participation in the ascension journey of humanity. Feel free to like and subscribe to find similar videos in the future. Check out our videos from the Universe Unlocked series in the description. Comment here if you need more clarity on anything. Search for any specific topic that might interest or concern you. And remember to keep exploring. Until next time, 47, logging out.